Right now, across the industry, crew are leaving vessels because of the culture on board. They're experiencing moral injury when leaders ask them to stay silent. They're burning out under common styles rooted in autocratic leadership rather than servant. Whether you're a deckhand trying to survive your first toxic chief officer, a captain who wants to do things differently, or a manager wondering why crew keep leaving, this episode will give you the language for what you've been feeling and a vision for what's possible. This is not a conversation about what's wrong with yachting. It's a conversation about what we're capable of when the right people decide to lead. Hi, Luis. Welcome to Yachting International Radio. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I've got to know you over the past couple of weeks, and I am truly inspired by your leadership. So we're going to unpack that further. Before we do, if you don't mind introducing yourself, telling us how long you've been working in the industry for, and yeah, I think that's probably the best place to start, and then we'll dive into quite a big interview today.
Perfect. Hi, Karine, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited about the things that we've been doing and where they could lead, hopefully to a better industry and, to a safer culture all around. My name is Luis. I hold a Master 3000. I have a difficulty saying I'm a captain because I think the word captain in itself is when you have people that follow you, which I'm sure we'll dwell into that in a second. I'm originally from Portugal, been in the industry for 18 years. I did leave a few times. Currently in Italy and looking for my next project.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luis. So best place to start, let's define leadership because I'm pretty sure it means different things for different people. So what's your version of leadership?
For me, it's leadership equals influence. It's the ultimate act of influence. So someone who others are influenced by through their behavior, decisions, and consistency. People respond to what they experience daily. So tone, fairness, predictability, and values, which is a big topic for me. So leadership, in essence, is the lived expression of one's values through behavior, especially under pressure.
And we spoke about this earlier in terms of values, not an easy one to define, but it's shaped by our lived experiences, and we adopt values normally from our primary caregivers, but it's such an important tool to grasp because I think it gives us more direction as leaders if we know what our values are and act in accordance to those values.
It starts from a very early age, and because values are formed by who you follow, so from your own leaders. And I think it starts from our parents and then into our teachers, and they just keep on developing throughout our lives. One of the points that I've mentioned before is when the people that you're following in your professional life have their values formed by the same, so by other leaders that had very strange values. So I think what happens is that when our values are formed in our industry by captains that had their values formed by other captains, so that the cycle in itself doesn't really break.
You know what, as you're showing that, what comes to mind for me, and I often hear it from crew, is when there's illegal behavior occurring on board and crew have a particular moral code and that behavior goes against that moral code. As a leader, how would you handle that? Manage it?
Okay.
This is a completely organic question. I'm so sorry. But I think it's really good to come up or basically unpack with what comes up in the moment. Yeah, so
can you give it to me again? Sorry.
We have our moral code.
Mm-hmm.
This constitutes our values, and then we arrive in the workplace, and let's say that there's illegal behavior going on, or something simple as the captain is sleeping, a married captain is sleeping with a stewardess. These are real life examples that have come through to me in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
The crew struggle with it, and it's a form of moral injury because it goes against their moral code. Now, as a leader, how does one support crew through those moral dilemmas?
This is a very tricky situation on board, and I think what we as leaders should foster at all times is creating a culture of, safety and openness. If a crew member arrives on board and they're confronted with such legal dilemmas, the culture, the yachting industry should have be in a way allowing this crew member to go and speak with their heads of department about these moral dilemmas. Unfortunately, in my opinion, only I don't think there's enough leadership training. There's not enough emotional intelligence, even at the level of heads of department, to be able to deal with that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the times, these sort of situations could have been I wouldn't say solved, but I would say handled at a much lower level, even before you reach an explosion time, if the first person that the crew member addressed or the first person that the crew member talked to would have had the emotional intelligence to deal with the problem. And I don't mean that people are not intelligent or anything like that. We just all have different values, as we just said. And I think when I talk about ethical leadership a lot is because of that. If a crew member was to go and speak with their heads of department and they had a little bit of knowledge about ethical leadership, then their response would create an environment of openness, of communication, of empathy, of respect. And the crew member would then feel that they would be able to, okay, maybe they won't be able to change this particular situation because it's a very tricky one, but they would be able to talk about it.
Process.
And often that probably would suffice.
I agree. I agree completely. You're right. I identified it. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, that was it. Sorry.
You've just identified a huge leadership gap, which is training. As a captain, and so I assume that your network is largely captains as well. Yes, maybe not. You guys are part of these WhatsApp groups and you're conversing there. I know it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Go on. Sorry, go on.
I'm curious to know what is the mentality around leadership training amongst captains, because the existing culture that I'm aware of is that your stripes are earned over time rather than the competencies that you have.
So this is a really interesting question, and I obviously, as an aspiring captain myself, and I'm hoping to still have a long career, and I need to put this in the correct words. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those captains in those groups, and I also don't have social media. So it kind of put me a little bit on the side on that. What I've noticed throughout the industry, and this started at early stages, when I did my first courses to become an officer of the watch, you obviously have heard about the human element course. Yeah. Now, I was like a 5-year-old on that course. I was so excited because we were talking about dealing with people. We were talking about how to deal with your crew. And so this course for me was amazing. When I spoke with the other participants of the course, when I spoke with other officers, when I encountered other people that have done the course, unfortunately, most of them think the course is a waste.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if they thought the delivery of the course was bad or if they thought the content was bad. The problem is not the course in itself. The problem is our perception of a course that deals with humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That might be not in where it should be. What I'm saying with that is that unfortunately in my career, and I think this is more directly to me, I haven't met a captain. I've met very few captains that have put the importance of emotional intelligence as on the same level as competence, as technical knowledge. And for me, this is very concerning because I think they come almost hand in hand. I think one of the issues that we're seeing is that people believe that being a captain is given to them by the license that they have and by the experience SC that they have. I believe that this is not the case. I believe that you become a captain when the people that you're in charge of are your followers, that they are influenced by you, that you have an impact on their well-being and on their lives in general. Being a captain because you have a license and you can drive a boat, it's not enough.
Meaningless.
We have an amazing opportunity to impact so many people in so many good ways. We have unlimited budgets. We could do crazy amounts of training. We can set out and do amazing objectives. And yet I'm seeing a constant view from leaders that hold their knowledge to their license or to their rank. And maybe, obviously, this is my personal opinion, but I think that's one of the gaps that we're seeing.
I know that the crew who are in the audience listening to this are shouting, how do I work for Luis? How do I get to work for him? Because so many people or crew are desperate for that type of leadership. And what we're talking about here is servant leadership.
Yeah. And there's a lot of personal history to this. And I think because I've worked in various different boats with various different leaders, and I hope there is a shift coming. I think there is a shift coming. And I think more and more I see posts or that this emotional intelligence, this idea that of being a captain is just your license is slowly fading away, and people are really wanting to become more aware of themselves and who they're leading.
Speaking on behalf of captains, what do you think you need from a shoreside support perspective to actualize this goal of closing the leadership gaps?
So we ultimately, as a captain, we have to continue our job and obviously make sure that the owner is getting what he wants. Although there is a lot of opportunity to apply all of these leadership skills and to... Sorry, Karine.
That's okay.
I'm going to start that again. Could you give me the question again?
It's okay. What would you like from a shoreside perspective to support you and captains who share similar sentiments as you to actualize the goal of closing the leadership gaps that we've just spoken about?
So if a captain was truly interested in creating this sort of environment, this emotional, intelligent environment, safe culture on board, I think it's massively important that the management company behind that vessel fully understands the idea behind it and is also aware of the impact that this could have.
Mm-hmm.
I have noticed in the past that obviously management companies are a lot more inclined to deal with commercial boats, and the private boats are left a little bit behind. I think that's another thing that it needs to be discussed at some point, but it needs to be a joint project between management, captain, and heads of department in order to be able to create that full system. It can't be the captain alone, or even the captain and the heads of department. If there's no support from management, the system won't work. And I think the support comes in very easy way. It doesn't need to be anything specific. It comes by allowing the captain to obviously perform the things that he wants to do with the crew, but it comes also from seeing the management engaging with the crew itself.
Again, that's going back to walking the talk.
Yeah. Well, I recently did my internal auditor course and DPA course. And on those two courses, it mentions a lot, and I mean a lot, involvement from the management at the level of personal interviews with the crew. Now, you've been a crew member. How many times were you interviewed in a room alone by management, by DPA, or by an internal auditor?
Never. And I remember for my first position on board, I didn't even get interviewed by the captain. It was just an email correspondence. And I had to buy my own ticket, and I landed in Ancona.
Oh, God.
At midnight, and there was no one at the airport to pick me up. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I don't speak Italian. I don't have a telephone number. Thank goodness the chief officer eventually arrived. But it's largely due to my ignorance, my fault. But in terms of the professionalism, yes, we still can do a bit of work in that area.
When I mean interviewed,
yeah.
When I mean interview, it wasn't actually interviewed for the job. According to the ISM code, internal auditors, and according to the DPA's functions, they should be interviewing you regularly, the whole crew.
Check-ins. Okay, so not your initial interview, employment interview.
No.
You're just referring to check-ins.
Yes, like an internal auditor that comes in, the yearly internal auditor to check the SMS effectiveness, should in reality performing interviews with the crew in private.
Engagement interviews, yes.
Yeah. Which leads me to another problem. Okay. What training do they have?
Yes.
You know, you've known management companies throughout your whole career, I'm sure. And I'm sure you've met internal and external auditors and DPAs. And my question is, they're supposed to do crew interviews. They're supposed to be emotionally intelligent to detect behavioral and cultural issues. But what training do they got?
Yeah, I guess this is why crew issues are falling through the gaps, because we're not adequately trained in dealing with them. I know when I was crew, there was a lack of trust around management companies. I don't know if that's still the case. I believe for some it is, and I would like to assist in closing that gap. But I think that the only way it's going to happen is if you see that hands-on approach that you've just spoken about, where there's more connection with the crew. And the crew need to know that there's that psychological safety there in order to open up, because I know there's still so much fear. If I say something, will I lose my job? What are the repercussions of that? And yeah, you're not going to get anywhere. Say things like that.
It's a vicious circle, but I honestly believe that it would be beneficial for everyone if the training was in place and if managers, captains, HODs were able to detect these issues before bigger things happen, before bigger accidents, before, psychological issues happen. And it would be ultimately, it becomes, it's very hard for me to find an example where the leadership that we currently have in yachting is being beneficial.
The other thing I want to mention is that for crew managers, for example, I know that a lot of them are inundated with work and they feel a sense of overwhelm, as I'm sure captains do, with that pressure to be all of the things and do all of the things. So I think training is vital. It creates a climate of safety, but I think important to impart the right skills in order for people in leadership roles to signpost to professionals so that it just takes the overwhelm away from them.
But interesting. How would you do that?
What do you mean? How?
Yeah. I might have missed a little bit. So you said the managers are extremely overwhelmed by work.
Yes.
But how would they go about
vessels that they have to take care of and the challenges that come through? Obviously, you've got DPA that is there to support, but I think you actually sent me what is covered in the DPA course, and there's no human element in there. And we're putting the pressure on DPAs to be that welfare support, but they're not trained in it. And now we're blaming DPAs, saying they're not competent in their role, which is really unfair. So it comes from it's an industry-wide issue.
But this is where ultimately the change will have to come all the way from the top. And I think this is where, groups like what we're seeing right now, that we're trying to make a change, we need to start thinking, how do we get to the top? How do we get to IMO? How do we change the parameters of the training? Because ultimately, what you want to see is DPAs getting leadership training, not just DPAs, but managers, internal auditors, external surveyors, port state control.
Absolutely.
It falls on, ultimately, you would hope that the external checks wouldn't have to worry so much about psychological safety, because the training that we've been giving the captains and the heads of department would already be amazing. So there wouldn't be so much talk about psychological safety on board, because we've already been putting our impacts on the training on board itself. But until things change, it is vital that we go to the top and we say, please change the parameters so that we can start seeing steps being followed and people wanting to look into the mirror and seeing that they need to.
And I think that will have a flow-on effect. So if, for example, the captains, it needs to be mandatory. I think the leadership training, not all captains are going to be putting their hands up and saying, hey, I want to do a 3-month leadership course. But it's just going to have that flow-on effect where DPAs, for example, will be less overwhelmed because the captains are in a position to deal with the challenges that come their way.
I fully agree. I can't think of anything better than a 3-month leadership course, but that's probably just me.
There's a few out there. The good ones are the ones that put their hands up to do the leadership course.
But ultimately, would be beneficial for the owners. And that, for me, is the part that still it doesn't make sense to me, because ultimately, if you get an emotional, capable captain with amazing technical knowledge that leads a team of heads of department that are all capable of active listening and ethical leadership, will lead to crew retention, to a safe work environment where people will speak up when there's a problem. It leads to a system where people will wake up in the morning and want to be in, which will eventually lead to amazing service, a reputable boat, and many other things. There's the impact is amazing.
And this goes back to the question around what would captains like to see from a shoreside support perspective. And I think if shoreside support understand what the goals are and the impact for the owner to have the crew working as a well-oiled machine and seeing that collaboration, that cohesion, the servant leadership, if they know the benefit, then they're more likely to support captains in meeting that goal.
Yeah.
So you being close to the owners, I'm not too sure if you've had close relationships with them. Some are quite private, but what is your sense and feel that a owner would like from their vessel and its operation?
In here, where I think we're entering a territory that it's still a little bit of unknown. I think it does vary from owner to owner, but it does come down to the same principles that is applied to us, which is values and behaviors and, psychological view on what do they expect. I think there hasn't been enough, I'm going to say publicity, but I'm not sure if that's the correct word. There hasn't been enough publicity out there to the owners about what a well-run vessel would look like. One of the things that I don't, for example, I think it's extremely beneficial is psychological availability for crew members on regular basis. Why is this not available? Recently I was asked to do a job ad in the industry. And it was supposed to be for a crew member, but I ended up doing a job ad for an owner. And I don't think there's enough publicity to the owners in order for them to get more out of a vessel. If an owner was to create a system or a program that encourages training, encourages psychological assessment, encourages charity wherever the boat goes, encourages a leadership development that encourages crew members to become better within themselves. If this was sold to the owner as, if you do this, you're going to spend a lot less money and you're going to have a much better boat. But this publicity isn't out there. This is not what it's sold to the owners.
A huge communication gap. I see that. However, the trend I'm seeing with the owners is they want crew longevity. They want that family feel, and obviously the turnover costs them a lot of money. So if they can plug, that's an added benefit.
But this is an interesting point, and I'm quite curious to hear your opinion. You say they want a family
environment
feeling on board. Okay. Why do they want a family feeling on board? Because what's the reason behind having a family feeling on board?
I guess because, I've never been asked this question, but the first word that comes up for me is privacy and intimacy. You're coexisting in such a small space, and it's not a large organization, an office that you come to and everyone's, doing their thing, passing ships in the night, but you are in so close proximity to each other that you don't want to have a stranger working for you. You want a familiar face. You want that someone who hears you, understands you, knows your preferences, where you could maybe spark a conversation.
Yeah.
Remove from your normal environment, and you want it to be a safe, warm, and welcoming environment, and that's how a family should feel.
That's how a family should feel. Fantastic. It's a different point, but I wonder how we could maybe perhaps see or make other people believe, because I always thought that the reason why owners wanted a family feeling on board is because they're family orientated themselves. But so are we. So are the crew members. And we have to be away from our families constantly. If an owner is family orientated, surely you can see that so are we. And the only way that you're going to have someone away from their family for a long period of time is by giving some sort of rotation so they can feel happy when they're away from their families. I know that we chose to do this job. I understand, and maybe I'm being a little bit idealistic. I'm not sure, but I think the best that you can get out of an employee is by being able to give them as much as you can, especially when it comes down to family issues. And rotation is such an important part of the industry. And again, it might be a little bit idealistic. But I think if an owner is family orientated, he would be able to understand why we need to rotation to be with our own families.
And what you're referring to there as well as intrinsic drivers of motivation. And I think the nature of the industry, it's so taxing physically, psychologically, emotionally. We do need to fill our cups. And that is time off to replenish and then come back and give of our best. It's like driving your car or the vessel, like you do so many kilometers, miles, and then you need a service.
Yeah, exactly.
We do too.
But you mentioned familiar faces, and it's interesting because I think some of the best well-run vessels out there, which, not coincidentally, but they run rotation for almost all the crew. And the crew stay, which then become familiar to the owner. I've known of a few vessels where even the deckhands and stewardesses, because they were on great packages and they were on not full rotation, but they were on 3-1 or something like that, and the crew, even the junior crew, end up staying for years, and which then creates the familiarity even when there is rotation with the owners, because they end up staying longer. And the reality is that it doesn't matter what we do. If the owners say, no rotation, I want to be familiar with my crew, they will never be familiar with the crew because the crew will just leave. They will find that.
Yeah, and then the other part of that is communicate. Someone needs to communicate to the owner that it's not going to work. And are we just painting a pretty picture, saying, yeah, sure, we can make that work, knowing that it's not? I think it takes a lot of courage to speak to our owner and tell them how it is. And if they want certain benefits, this is the way to go about it. Otherwise, if you don't go that route, these are the costs involved. Luis, I feel like we've opened a can of worms. Now,
yeah.
I've got over a page of questions. I've only asked question number 1. So I'm going to end it on that note, and we're going to do a sequel.
Okay.
A follow-up interview, because we want everyone to digest what we've just spoken about today, but I think it would be a great segue for the more deeper questions. Yes, we are going to
go
deeper questions to come. So Luis, thank you so much for your time. It's a great pleasure. And I know we share similar passions and values, and this is why we were able to have an organic conversation today.
No, and I hope with all these things happening and with your support, and which I think it's been absolutely incredible, I think we can really, try to get to the top of the mountain and try to make some significant change because the industry has so much to offer. And I think we're missing out on the impact that we can create for so many people. So, big thank you, Karine, and, keep up the good work, and hope to speak with you soon.
Thanks, Luis. Appreciate it.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.